Bruce. Whoop. Okay, we'll do that little click thing where we have to say recording in progress. Thank you everyone for being here. It really means a lot to me to see so many faces here. So thank you so much for joining us. Wow. Yeah, Hannah did touch on something there. The original draft of this book, when it was all finished, was 175,000 words. Which for those of you who know, that's not a marketable book. That's kind of more like in textbook range. So we had to cut it down to 115,000. But yeah, Hannah got to see some of the really, really early drafts when I first had my handful of, I don't know what, 3, 4 chapters, and I'm sending it to her and I'm flinching at the same time going, please tell me this doesn't suck. Please tell me that this is actually worthwhile in some form or fashion. And they've limped it along, and she helped so many times with in so many ways, not the least of which was just encouragement. So I thank you. I thank you all so much. So yeah, I think there's a lot of messages that this book tries to touch on, but one of them actually was really eloquently and really beautifully expressed by a friend of mine who also works in my sort of my day job as an internet marketer. And he was willing to send out an email to his audience, here's this book from a friend of mine named Jean, and you should buy it because it's really cool, which was really amazing for him to do. And as we were just having a very initial conversation, and I've known this man, Chris Cade, for years, and knew that he was a divorced dad, I said to him, I said, I'm trying to treat, the people with, a gentle eye and try to really tell a lot of stories from the heart and then combine it with research. And I said, but I am very critical sometimes of our child welfare and adoption systems. And he says to me, oh, you don't have to tell me. He's like, all of the times in which I've had to fight with the court system in order to just remain a part of my son's life. He said, you don't have to tell me. And I said, okay, I gotcha. And I didn't see what he sent out to his audience in advance until the day of. And on his mailing list, he wrote this really beautiful email about how systems don't serve love, about how systems try to serve love, right? Like we have this child welfare system that is attempting to do good. And we know that there are zillions of individuals all throughout our nation who are genuinely trying to do good. And yet there's this system that has its brackets and its guardrails around all of this. And systems end up sort of serving themselves rather than the people that they are set up and profess to try to serve. And so I thought it was just a really beautiful email that really did set the tone of what the message is for the book. So why did I write this? About 3 years ago is when I started this project. I am one of those adoptees who had a great life. Life is great. Adoption never affected me. And also never believed that I was actually worthy of searching for my birth family. I am one of those people who actually always approached it, oh, if my birth mother is gone on, I hope she has a beautiful life. I hope if she wanted to have 47 children, she's gone on and done that. Whatever it is that she's doing with her life, I would never want to interfere. I now see that as, of course, the symptom of my own shame and my own unworthiness playing out in that scenario. But that isn't the way I saw it back then. And I didn't start to search until fall of 2020, which was, it was Thanksgiving weekend. We know what 2020 was. I'm huddled in with my husband and my mother-in-law. And for the first time, even though I'd done Ancestry, like, I don't know, 2012, I'd done it many, many years ago. For the first time, some close-ish matches turned up, and that I had some second cousin matches that, you get that email from Ancestry and it tells you, oh, you've got a second cousin match. And I went in and I looked and I realized I had several of them that I hadn't paid attention to in years. And not only that, but they split both sides of the tree. Like I had people who weren't related to each other, and I went, oh, that's interesting. And I was talking to my husband and my mother-in-law, and I'm like, what do I do? You know, my adoptive parents are long gone by this point. What do I do with this? And my husband, he said to me, he's like, babe, if you're even thinking about searching, your birth mother would be in her 70s by now. So no one is getting any younger here. So you better get after it. And that tipped that off. Then I found out that because I was born in the time that I was in Washington State, I am one of those who does now have access to my birth certificate. And then we found my mother very quickly. In the course of that is when one other time where again I'm sitting around with my blessed, wonderful friend and life partner husband, and he's like, babe, what is your white whale? Like, what is the thing you still think you want to do with your life that you haven't done yet? And I go, I think maybe I want to write a book. And he's like, okay, fiction or not? I'm like, well, nonfiction. That's the only thing I write because I own a news blog. I've written content. Again, I'm a internet social media marketer person. Not that I know how to market my own book. I really suck at that. That's really hard to market your own stuff, but I love telling other people how to do that. So, we're sitting there and we're talking, and he's like, well, what about writing about this adoption thing? And I said, yeah, you're right. There's a whole, even just the decision to search and even just beginning the process and then getting a glimpse of who my mother was, even though we don't unfortunately have contact, all of those things were very profound shifts inside of me. And I thought, yeah, let's do that. So fall of 2021 is when I got quasi serious about it. And then spring of 2022 is when I got really serious. And so now here we are in spring of 2025 with amazingly this, finished project. So one of the things that I also wanted to stay sensitive to is, I mean, I'm not a mental health professional. I don't have any initials after my name. I don't have a degree in social work. I don't have any of those things. Um, I'm not a journalist. You know, when Abby Hasbury and I sat down to talk about the possibility of her writing the very beautiful foreword for the book, which she composed, I said, I'm airing all of this out with her. I'm like, I have a bachelor's degree in fashion merchandising. I am not credentialed in this industry at all in any way. And yet here I am with the audacity to have attempted this. So here we are, for better or worse. But someone is here tonight, and how is it that you can find a person? There we are. So one of the two researchers who I hired, some of you know this and some of you don't, in the course of writing the book, I hired two lovely young ladies who were at the time UNLV psychology or psychology adjacent students. And they worked with me for about a year and a half, almost 2 years on this project. And so one of those is here tonight. So I'd like you to meet Zen for just a second here, and let's give her a little love.
Hello, hi. Thank you
Hi.
so much. I'm just so amazed by Eugene. I'm so appreciative of this opportunity to have worked with you and dive deep in this research. It was so eye-opening for me. I learned so much about this whole entire process involving the all types of perspectives, the adoptees, adoptive parents, birth parents. I've read shocking statistics, amazing heartfelt, painful stories at times. It was just overall, it was really great to learn about all of these perspectives, and I just appreciate you bringing me into your world and sharing your story as well. So I'm just so proud of you. I'm so happy that I was a part of this entire experience. So thank you, Gina. Thank you, everyone.
Ah, isn't she beautiful? Isn't she amazing, you guys?
Thank
Oh
you.
my God. Oh my God. Um, yeah, yeah, that was a lot. Zen and Sadie and I used to joke sometimes we would need our own separate support group because I mean, there were times when these girls, I know they would be just, deep under the hood, either, searching for statistical information or digging through, mountains of study on foster care and birth parents and birth parent depression and adoptive parent depression. And I mean there were times when it was rough going, and then there were also hopeful stories and hopeful times. So it was all of the above. So I can't thank you enough. um wow. So yeah, I mean that was the work. um and I mean, as far as the storytelling and the interviewees, I see a few folks who I interviewed, I mean, Hannah was there, Dirk was there, Sarah. Oh my God, Sarah, yeah, hi. And there's a few others I'm sure that I'm missing. Tina is here, Diana's here. So, there's a few of you here, which I so appreciate. Um, One of the questions that I commonly get asked, it's funny, kind of outside of the constellation, is people will say, how did you find almost 100 people to talk to you, about their life or adoption or their stories? And I would always go, oh, that's the easiest part. And they would go, really? I'm like, yeah, this is a population that doesn't get heard from much, to really tell their stories. I said, I rarely had a no. I took no's. There were a few times when I talked to someone and they said, I don't think so. I don't think this is for me. And I said, great, that's fine. Um, but we want to tell our stories because we want people to understand us better, I think. And that seems to be a really universal need. And that doesn't seem to differ whether you're talking about someone who's from foster care or foster care alumni or adoptive whoop, don't know what happened there. But it doesn't matter where you sit in the constellation. I think so many constellation members feel misunderstood, even though so many people look at our situation and decide, oh, it's like this or it's like that. And I think that that's something that also says a lot about the work that we have to do and what I try to bring forth in the book. Um, One of the things that I think matters is my goals did change over the course of the book. One of the things that I say in the final chapter of the book is that this isn't the book I started to write. I started to write a book that was just going to be examining the emotional complexities. And I was so impressed and moved with the girls who went away that I knew I felt like that research was important. And so I wanted to definitely bring in the research, which again, as soon as I got under the hood on that, I realized how overwhelmed I would be. And if I hadn't started to, if I hadn't brought on Sadie and Zen, we wouldn't be here yet. I'd still be researching. Oh my God. Um, so without them, we wouldn't be here now for sure. But I really wanted to just examine the emotional complexities, and that's where I thought I would stay. And I was fascinated by the history, so that's why I felt like it was important for us to do the history of how American adoption has evolved over the ages, and also just, its historical roots overall as a practice. But I also found the research really fascinating, and this is my raising father, my adoptive dad, was a school psychologist. I think I seem to come with a certain amount of natural curiosity, but I think that also certainly flourished under his eye, raising me. And so I found the blending of those two things incredibly fascinating. And so it was a really incredible journey to then actually dig into a massive amount of adoption research and then just start seeing where it led us. And then it led us into different places and led us into other places. And then I'd have to pull back and go, okay, wait a minute. What are we doing here? How far down the rabbit hole do we go on this particular piece? What do I need to let go? Because I was aware of the fact that I had to control scope. which 175,000 word count tells you how little I did. Although there's still things that didn't make it into the book. Um, but I mean, my goals did change, and my goals changed because the research and the storytelling led me in certain directions that I didn't expect, and that I wasn't even really ready for. And so, we talk in adoption land a lot about the fog, and we talk about or moving into adoption what's the word? um, oh my God, consciousness. There we are. Consciousness. I used to have a mindfulness and meditation program, consciousness. So I like that model a lot because it gives us room to be expansive for the way that we can go through that journey, and we can go through that journey, and we can go through that journey. And it also acknowledges, as does, a journey through the fog. I mean, it's painful. There are parts of this that were painful. And so I evolved as a person quite dynamically throughout this process, and I'm grateful for it. So one of the things that I think, bring to the table, even with all the disclaimers about the fact that, again, I'm not a journalist, not a mental health professional, don't have any of that background at all, and admire greatly those who do. I'm a business owner and I'm an entrepreneur, and my husband and I have been business owners since 1999. And one of the things that I think is kind of hard that I do bring to the table is a business owner entrepreneurial eye toward what is the reality of child welfare in America that operates sort of like a business. And that's hard. That's a really hard thing to face up to. And that is, I think, one of the things that I do try to bring to the table and hopefully manage to do in a way where it's an honest examination of where we are and how adoption and child welfare functions in the United States, while also giving grace to the idea that the individuals, the families involved, are also not responsible for how things have grown and how they have evolved. And unfortunately, we do know that there are very real consequences that get played out then, and that every single person on this Zoom and so many others that we know in this community have lived under and lived with and lived through, and still continue to live with and through. And so it's hard to try to thread that needle. I'm hoping that I manage to do that, that I manage to successfully bring people into a greater awareness, and also make sure that people understand. I'm just trying to point out the inherent points of friction that exist when you start to apply an industry mechanism and methodology and outlook to something as deeply societal as child welfare, and point out those inevitable points of friction. So hopefully you'll feel I was successful in doing that. Um, and even so, what I wanted to make sure that I tried to bring in were all of these stories of both, um, what's the word I'm looking for? There was a lot of personal pain and personal agony and anguish, like the anguish I think that all of us have had to live through. And that's anguish, whether you're talking about, an adult wrestling with the consequences of, you know, separation trauma, or what we call the primal wound, the anguish over someone who was lied to about their origins and not told the truth, the anguish of adoptive parents who are told one thing and then live a very different life. And the anguish of, birth parents who relinquish, which I think people understand is a fundamentally painful experience. And then our society completely is just not capable of understanding what their needs or orientation is either. And so if we can try to find our ways of connecting with each other without scapegoating individuals, but yet trying to hold the system accountable at a higher level, I think maybe that's where we need to try to continue to head. And in my book, I sort of hope that we can find inspiration from it or even guidance and ideas about how to continue to try to improve this for everyone that's involved, because there's a lot of adopted people out there in the world, right? I run into folks every day. That was another question when I was first even, starting to, bring the book out into read and critique groups, is people would say, "Well, who's your market for this?" And I'd be like, "Well, I don't know. There's at least 5 million adopted persons right now in America. And all of those people have parents, and they have parents on both sides. So that's a lot of people right there." And they go, "Yeah, you're right." um, I don't know. When I was talking to Jennifer Dining Ghostin at one point in time, after she had started to read my book, she asked me point blank, she said, "Did you write this book for the community, or did you write this book to be taken outside of the community?" And I said, "I actually I did very much try to write a book that would be embraced outside of the adoption constellation, but also hopefully would be respected and embraced by those of us who are inside the constellation. I would have been devastated if this was something that you all felt didn't ring true for you." So I'm hoping that I again managed to thread that needle, um, and that we can that this book can hopefully become a part of the conversation as we try to impact our society for good. So that's kind of my spiel, guys. At this point, we can go ahead and take some questions.